The summer sun beat down on the crowded palace courtyard as tourists from around the world gathered to watch the changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Marcus Chen, a 13-year-old boy with designer sneakers and the latest smartphone clutched in his hand. His parents, wealthy business owners from overseas, had brought him on this European vacation. But Marcus seemed more interested in his social media followers than the historic ceremony unfolding before him. The royal guard stood perfectly still in their crimson uniforms and tall bearskin hats, their faces expressionless as they maintained their posts. These were not actors or performers. They were highly trained soldiers who had earned their position through dedication and service. But to Marcus, they were nothing more than living statues put there for his entertainment. "This is so boring," Marcus complained loudly, his voice carrying across the respectful silence of the crowd. His mother, distracted by her own phone, barely acknowledged him. His father was busy recording everything on his camera. Not paying attention to his son's increasingly restless behavior, Marcus wandered closer to one of the guards. A tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes that stared straight ahead. The guard's name was William Barrett, though no one in the crowd knew this. They didn't know that William had served his country for 15 years, that he had been deployed to dangerous conflict zones, or that standing guard at the palace was considered one of the highest honors in his career. To them, he was simply part of the scenery. "Hey, statue man," Marcus called out, snickering as he glanced back at his phone, recording the interaction. "Can you even hear me in there? Or are you just a robot?" Several tourists turned to look, some shaking their heads in disapproval, but no one said anything. William remained perfectly still, his training allowing him to ignore distractions that would break lesser soldiers. He had dealt with rude tourists before, especially children who didn't understand the significance of his role, but Marcus wasn't finished. Emboldened by the attention his video was getting from the few friends watching his live stream, he stepped even closer. "I bet you're not even real," he said louder, now just inches from William's post. "My dad says people like you are just decoration. You probably can't even fight." The crowd began to murmur uncomfortably. An elderly woman whispered to her husband that someone should stop the boy. A tour guide tried to gently suggest that Marcus step back and show respect, but his parents waved her away dismissively. "He's just having fun," Marcus's father said without looking up from his camera. "It's not hurting anyone." Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a chocolate bar. He unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, and then held it up near William's face. "Want some?" "Oh wait, you can't move, can you? You're stuck there like a dummy." William's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. Years of training had prepared him for moments like this, though each one still tested his patience and professionalism. Then Marcus did something that made several people in the crowd gasp. He took a bite of the chocolate and deliberately dropped the wrapper at William's feet. "Oops," he said with mock innocence, his phone still recording. "Guess you can't pick that up either." "Some guard you are?" A young couple nearby looked horrified. The woman pulled out her own phone, beginning to record not for entertainment, but as evidence of the disrespectful behavior. An older gentleman started to step forward to intervene, but the palace security seemed to be watching and waiting. Trusting William to handle the situation appropriately, Marcus grew bolder still. He began to make faces at William, contorting his features and laughing at his own antics. His live stream comments were filling with emojis and encouragement from his friends back home, none of them understanding the gravity of disrespecting someone who had sacrificed so much for their country. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with entitlement. "My dad could buy this whole palace. He's richer than probably everyone here, and you're just standing around doing nothing all day. What a waste of time. Don't you have anything better to do?" The crowd had grown quieter now, the usual chatter dying down as more people became aware of the scene unfolding. Parents held their children closer, whispering lessons about respect. Some tourists looked embarrassed, as if Marcus's behavior reflected poorly on all visitors. William continued to stare straight ahead, but those close enough could see something change in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but a deep sadness. He had stood guard through rain and snow, through pain and exhaustion. He had served beside brothers and sisters in arms who never made it home, And now he stood silent while a child, who had never known sacrifice or discipline, mocked everything he represented. Marcus circled around William, his phone capturing every angle. "Look at this, guys," he narrated for his stream. "The robot soldier. Completely useless. Can't even tell me to go away?" He reached out as if to touch William's uniform, his fingers inches from the pristine fabric that represented years of service and honor. That's when something unexpected happened. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, broke away from her grandmother's hand and walked straight up to Marcus. She wore a simple dress and carried a small stuffed bear. Her voice was clear and sweet as she looked up at the teenager. "That's not nice," she said simply. "My grandpa was a soldier. He was brave. This man is brave too." "Ugh." Marcus looked down at her, surprised by the interruption. He laughed awkwardly. "Whatever, kid. Go back to your grandma." But the little girl didn't move. She turned to William, and with all the seriousness her young face could muster, she saluted him. It was a clumsy, childish salute, but it carried more respect than anything else that had happened that afternoon. William's eyes flickered down for just a fraction of a second, acknowledging her gesture with the slightest nod that only she seemed to notice. Then his gaze returned to the distance. His duty unchanged. The grandmother rushed forward to collect her granddaughter, apologizing softly, but the little girl had sparked something in the crowd. More people began to frown openly at Marcus's behavior. The atmosphere shifted from passive observation to active disapproval. Marcus felt the change, but misinterpreted it as jealousy of his boldness. "See," he said to his phone. "Even kids here are weird. So serious about everything." His mother finally looked up from her phone, noticing the stares directed at her son and her family. She frowned slightly but said nothing, not wanting to cause a scene by disciplining Marcus in public. His father continued filming, oblivious to everything except getting the perfect shots for their vacation album. The ceremony was reaching its conclusion, and soon the guards would be relieved and march away. Marcus, sensing his window of opportunity closing, decided to do something he thought would be the ultimate finale to his stream. He stepped directly in front of William, blocking the guard's sight line completely. "Final test," Marcus announced to his viewers. "Let's see if I can make the statue crack." He began waving his arms, dancing ridiculously, making loud noises. The crowd's disapproval turned to outright disgust. Several people now had their phones out, recording Marcus rather than the ceremony. The palace security officers exchanged glances, their hands moving to their radios. But William remained still, a mountain of discipline and restraint. His face showed nothing, though inside he thought of all the young soldiers he had trained over the years, teaching them the same values of honor and respect that seemed so foreign to this privileged child. Marcus, frustrated by his inability to provoke a reaction, made his final mistake. He reached out and actually touched William's uniform, tugging at the fabric while laughing into his camera. The moment Marcus's fingers made contact with William's uniform, everything changed. The palace security officers immediately stepped forward, their expressions stern and professional. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, spoke firmly but calmly. "Oh, young man, step away from the guard immediately." Marcus jumped back, startled. His confident smirk faltered for the first time. "What? I was just joking around. It's not a big deal." "Touching a royal guard is a serious offense," the officer continued, her voice carrying across the now silent courtyard. "You need to come with us." Marcus's parents finally snapped to attention. His father lowered his camera, confusion crossing his face. "Officer, surely this is just a misunderstanding. He's only a child." "A child old enough to know better," the officer replied coolly. "Interfering with royal guards in the performance of their duties is against the law. He's been warned multiple times by his own actions to step back, and he chose to continue and make physical contact." The crowd watched with a mixture of satisfaction and concern as Marcus's face turned pale. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated. "Mom, Dad, do something," he pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. His mother rushed forward, her designer handbag swinging at her side. "This is ridiculous. We're tourists. We didn't know the rules. You can't arrest a child for touching a uniform. The security officer remained unmoved. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, madam. Your son has been disrespectful and disruptive for the past 20 minutes. Multiple witnesses can attest to his behavior. He will need to come to the security office where we will determine the appropriate course of action. Marcus looked around desperately, hoping someone in the crowd would defend him, but he saw only disapproving faces. The young couple who had been recording showed their footage to another officer. The elderly gentleman who had wanted to intervene earlier shook his head sadly. Even other teenagers in the crowd looked embarrassed on his behalf. But I have a plane to catch, Marcus's father protested. We're leaving tomorrow. This will ruin our entire vacation. Should have been considered before allowing your son to behave this way, another officer stated, arriving to assist his colleague. Please follow us. The matter can be resolved more quickly if you cooperate. As the officers began to escort Marcus and his parents toward the security office, something remarkable happened. William Barrett, the guard who had endured Marcus's torment with perfect discipline, finally moved. The changing of the guard ceremony was complete, and he was now off duty. He stepped down from his post with military precision and walked directly toward the small group. Everyone froze. Marcus looked terrified, certain he was about to face the wrath of the man he had mocked so mercilessly. The crowd held its breath, cameras still recording. Wondering what would happen next, William stopped in front of Marcus and looked down at the boy with those same kind eyes that had stared straight ahead throughout the ordeal. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured, carrying the weight of experience and wisdom. Do you know what this uniform represents? William asked quietly. Marcus couldn't meet his gaze. He stared at the ground, his phone hanging limply in his hand, his live stream long forgotten. No, sir, he mumbled. It represents service, William continued. It represents every man and woman who chose to put others before themselves. Some of my friends died wearing uniforms like this. They gave their lives so that people like you could stand here today free and safe, even if you choose to use that freedom to mock us. Tears began to well up in Marcus's eyes, though he fought to hold them back. The reality of what he had done was finally sinking in. This wasn't a video game or a social media stunt. This was real life, and he had hurt a real person. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. William nodded slowly. I appreciate that. But apologies are easy when you're caught. The real question is whether you've learned anything from this. He turned to the security officers. If I may make a request, rather than pursuing charges, perhaps there's an alternative that might prove more educational for this young man. The lead officer raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind, Corporal Barrett? Community service, Williams suggested. At the Veterans Hospital, let him spend time with soldiers who have sacrificed far more than a few hours of standing still. Let him learn what service truly means. Marcuse's parents looked at each other, then at William, surprised by his compassion. The crowd, which had been so angry moments before, seemed to soften slightly. Even the security officers considered the proposal with thoughtful expressions. That would be up to the commanding officer and the family, the lead officer said, but it's certainly an option we can discuss. Marcus's mother stepped forward, her eyes red. We would be grateful for that opportunity. Marcus will do whatever is required, right, Marcus? Marcus nodded vigorously, relief flooding his face. Yes, anything. I'm really sorry, sir. I didn't think about what I was doing. William studied the boy for a long moment. You didn't think because you've never had to face real consequences. You've never had to put anyone else first. That needs to change. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pin, a regimental badge that represented his unit. I'm going to give you this. It belonged to a friend of mine who died in service. His name was Thomas Riley, and he was one of the bravest men I ever knew. He was only 23 years old when he gave his life saving others. William placed the pin in Marcus's trembling hand. I want you to keep this as a reminder, not of your mistake today, but of what you could become if you choose to learn from it. Thomas would have wanted that. He always believed in second chances. Marcus closed his fist around the pin, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. I'll keep it forever, I promise. The security officers conferred quietly among themselves, then with someone on their radios. After several minutes of discussion, the lead officer returned to the group. "Here's what's going to happen," she announced. "We're going to require Marcus to complete 40 hours of community service at the Royal British Legion's care facilities. He'll help veterans with daily tasks, listen to their stories, and learn about the sacrifices made by service members. His parents will be responsible for ensuring he completes this service. Additionally, there will be a formal apology letter written to Corporal Barrett and displayed at the Palace's Visitor Center as a reminder to others about proper behavior." Marcus's father started to protest about the inconvenience, but his wife placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "We understand and agree completely. Thank you for this opportunity," instead of pressing charges. William nodded to the officers, then turned back to Marcus one final time. "Service is not a punishment, young man. It's a privilege. I hope you'll discover that." With that, he saluted sharply, did an about-face, and marched away to join his fellow guards who were waiting by the palace entrance. The crowd watched him go, many wiping their own eyes, moved by his grace and dignity. As the security officers led Marcus and his parents away to complete the necessary paperwork, the little girl who had saluted William earlier broke free from her grandmother again. She ran up to Marcus and tugged on his sleeve. "Will you really help the soldiers?" she asked earnestly. Marcus knelt down to her level, the pin still clutched in his hand. "Yes, I will. I promise." She smiled and handed him her stuffed bear. "Give this to someone who needs a friend. My grandpa says soldiers sometimes feel lonely." Marcus took the bear carefully, as if it were made of glass. "I will, thank you." The grandmother collected her granddaughter again, giving Marcus a small, encouraging nod. As they walked away, Marcus looked down at the bear in one hand and the pin in the other. Feeling the weight of both far more than their physical mass, the crowd began to disperse. The ceremony over and the drama concluded. People talked in hushed tones about what they had witnessed, many expressing hope that the young man would truly learn from his experience. Some posted their videos online not to mock Marcus, but to share a powerful lesson about respect and redemption in the security office. Marcus sat quietly between his parents, while paperwork was processed and arrangements were made for his community service. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood outside the Royal British Legion care facility, his stomach churning with anxiety. His parents had extended their stay in the country specifically for him to complete his community service, decision that had caused considerable tension in the family. His father complained constantly about the business deals he was missing. His mother worried about what their friends back home would think. But Marcus had changed in those 3 weeks. The pin William had given him never left his pocket, and the little girl's stuffed bear sat on the dresser in his hotel room as a constant reminder of the person he wanted to become. He had spent hours researching Thomas Riley, the soldier whose pin he carried, learning about his bravery and sacrifice. The more he learned, the more ashamed he felt about his behavior. A coordinator named Sarah greeted him at the entrance. She was a woman in her 50s with warm eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You must be Marcus. Welcome. I understand you're here to complete community service hours." Marcus nodded, unable to find his voice. He expected judgment, condemnation, but Sarah simply smiled and handed him a visitor's badge. "We're grateful for any help we receive," she said kindly. "Our veterans deserve all the support we can give them. I'm going to pair you with some of our residents who would appreciate companionship and assistance. Are you ready?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice stronger than he felt. Sarah led him through corridors lined with photos of soldiers from different eras. Different conflicts, different lives united by their service. Marcus studied each face, wondering about their stories, their sacrifices, their families. The first veteran Marcus met was Albert Henderson, a 92-year-old man who had fought in World War II. Albert sat in a wheelchair by a window, staring out at the garden with distant eyes that had seen horrors Marcus couldn't imagine. "Albert, this is Marcus." Sarah introduced them. "He's going to be helping out here for a while." "Marcus, Albert loves to play chess, but his hands shake too much to move the pieces himself anymore. Would you be willing to help him play?" Marcus sat down across from Albert, setting up the chessboard between them. The old man's eyes focused on him, surprisingly sharp despite his age. "You're the boy from the palace," Albert said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus's face burned with shame. "You saw the video?" "My grandson showed me," Albert replied, his weathered hands resting on his lap. "Said I should refuse to let you help me. But I told him everyone deserves a second chance. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life." "Sorry," Marcus said, the words feeling inadequate. "I was stupid and disrespectful. I didn't understand." Albert nodded slowly. "Understanding comes from experience. You haven't lived enough to understand yet. But you're here, and that's a start. Now, let's play. I'll tell you about the real guards I knew. The ones who didn't get to stand at palaces but stood in trenches instead." For the next 2 hours, Marcus moved chess pieces according to Albert's instructions while listening to stories that made his heart ache. Stories of young men barely older than himself who charged into machine gun fire because their duty required it. Stories of friends who never came home, of injuries that lasted lifetimes, of nightmares that never faded. "William Barrett, the guard you mocked," Albert said as they neared the end of their game. "I know his story. He saved 3 children from a burning building during a deployment in Afghanistan. Went back in when everyone else had evacuated. Suffered terrible burns. Spent 6 months recovering. That's why he stands guard now instead of active combat duty. Not because he's decoration, but because he's a hero who paid a price for his heroism." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. He hadn't known. He hadn't even tried to know. "I carried a pin just like the one he gave you," Albert continued, noticing the chain around Marcus's neck where the pin now hung. "Lost it somewhere in France, 1944. Means more than gold, doesn't it?" "Yes, sir," Marcus whispered. Over the following weeks, Marcus met more veterans. There was Patricia Collins, a nurse who had served in Vietnam and still woke screaming from nightmares of the wounded she couldn't save. There was David Kumar, who had lost both legs in Iraq, but maintained a cheerful spirit and taught Marcus about gratitude and resilience. There was Elizabeth Morrison, whose husband had been killed in service, leaving her to raise 3 children alone while honoring his memory. Each person Marcus met taught him something different. Patricia taught him about the invisible wounds that never heal. David taught him that strength isn't about physical wholeness but spiritual resilience. Elizabeth taught him about the families who sacrifice alongside the soldiers. Marcus began arriving early and staying late. His 40 required hours were completed within 2 weeks, but he kept coming back. He helped feed residents who couldn't manage on their own. He read letters from grandchildren to those whose eyes had failed them. He pushed wheelchairs through gardens and listened to stories that would have bored him senseless just a month before. His parents noticed the change. His father stopped complaining about the delayed return home. His mother put away her phone during their evening meals together, actually talking to her son for the first time in years. They visited the facility once and stood in the background watching Marcus carefully lift a spoonful of soup to an elderly veteran's mouth, his patience and gentleness unmistakable. "Is that our son?" his father asked quietly, barely recognizing the boy. "It's who he was always meant to be," his mother replied, tears in her eyes. One afternoon, Sarah approached Marcus as he was helping Albert with his afternoon tea. "There's someone here to see you," she said with a mysterious smile. Marcus looked up to see William Barrett standing in the doorway, dressed in civilian clothes. His heart nearly stopped. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over the tea. "Corporal Barrett," Marcus stammered. "I didn't know you were coming," William smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. "I wanted to see how you were doing. Sarah's been giving me updates." Albert chuckled from his wheelchair. "This boy's been here almost every day. Reminds me of myself at his age, after I learned what really mattered." William pulled up a chair and sat down. "I owe you an apology, Marcus." Marcus's eyes widened in shock. "You owe me an apology?" "Sir, I'm the one who was horrible to you." "Yes, you were," William agreed frankly. "But I gave you that pin as a test, and I've realized that wasn't entirely fair. You were just a child acting the way you'd been taught by a world that values entertainment over respect. I should have seen that." "No," Marcus interrupted, finding his voice stronger than ever before. "You were right to test me. And I failed at first. But you gave me a chance to pass a different test, a more important one. You taught me what Thomas Riley's pin really means." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with handwriting. "I've been writing down everyone's stories. Albert, Patricia, David, Elizabeth, all of them. I asked their permission, and they said yes. I want to share these stories on my social media, the same place where I mocked you. I want my friends to know what real heroes look like." William took the notebook, flipping through pages filled with careful notes and heartfelt observations. His eyes grew misty as he read Marcus's words describing the veterans with respect and admiration. "This is good work," William said quietly. "Thomas would be proud." Marcus swallowed hard. "I want to do more. After I go home, I want to start a program at my school. Community service hours at veterans facilities. Maybe other kids need to learn what I learned." Albert reached out and patted Marcus's hand with his trembling fingers. "That's the spirit, boy. Turn your mistake into something meaningful." William stood and extended his hand to Marcus. Not a handshake between an adult and child, but between equals who understood sacrifice and service. Marcus took it firmly. "You've completed your required hours," William said. "But Sarah tells me you keep coming back. These people matter," Marcus replied simply. "How could I not come back?" 6 months had passed since that fateful day at the palace. Marcus sat in his school auditorium, his palms sweating as he waited to give a presentation to the entire student body. The principal had agreed to let him speak after reviewing his proposal for a veterans service program. Impressed by both his sincerity and the detailed plan he had developed, his parents sat in the back row, having flown in specifically for this moment. Next to them, via video call on a tablet held by the principal's assistant, William Barrett and several residents from the Royal British Legion facility watched from across the ocean. Albert, Patricia, David, and Elizabeth were all there. Eager to see the young man who had touched their lives as much as they had touched his, the principal finished her introduction, and Marcus walked to the podium. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the microphone. But when he touched the pin hanging around his neck, Thomas Riley's pin, he felt a surge of courage. 6 months ago, I was the worst version of myself, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I was entitled, rude, and completely ignorant about what really matters in life. Some of you probably saw the video that went viral, the one where I mocked a royal guard at the palace in London. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some students had indeed seen it, though Marcus had asked for it to be taken down from his own accounts. But the internet never truly forgets, and copies existed everywhere. The guard's name is Corporal William Barrett, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the screen where William's face appeared, and he showed me more grace and dignity than I deserved. Instead of being angry, he gave me an opportunity to learn. He introduced me to people who changed my life forever. He clicked a button, and the screen behind him filled with photos. Albert smiling over a chessboard, Patricia tending to flowers in the garden, David laughing despite his wheelchair, Elizabeth holding a photograph of her late husband in his uniform. These are real heroes, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Not because they wear medals or stand guard at palaces, although some do. They're heroes because they chose service over self. They sacrificed comfort, safety, and sometimes their health or their lives for people they would never meet. For people like us, told Albert's story of surviving World War II, of the friends left behind in foreign soil. He shared Patricia's nightmares and her unwavering commitment to healing others despite her own pain. He described David's resilience and Elizabeth's strength as a military widow. With each story, the auditorium grew quieter, more attentive. I spent 8 weeks at the Royal British Legion facility, Marcus explained. The first 40 hours were required community service. The next 120 hours were my choice. Because once I met these people, once I heard their stories, I couldn't walk away. I realized that my whole life had been about taking attention, taking things, taking people for granted. They taught me about giving. He paused, taking a deep breath. That's why I'm here today. I want to propose a partnership between our school and local veterans facilities. Not as punishment, but as privilege. We have so much to learn from people who served. I've created a program outline with the help of Corporal Barrett and the facility coordinators. The screen changed to show a detailed program structure, monthly visits, mentorship opportunities, oral history projects, assistance with daily tasks, and social events. Marcus had thought of everything, down to transportation, logistics, and liability waivers. I know some of you are thinking this sounds boring, Marcus admitted. I would have thought the same thing 6 months ago, but I promise you, hearing a 92-year-old man describe DAW while you help him eat his lunch is anything but boring. Listening to a nurse talk about saving lives in Vietnam while you read her mail is unforgettable. These experiences will change you if you let them. He clicked to another slide, showing his social media account. What was once filled with shallow posts and entertainment now featured veteran stories, historical facts about military service, and information about supporting those who served. I also started sharing these stories online, Marcus said. I have about 50,000 followers now. People from all over the world who want to hear about real heroes instead of reality TV stars and video game streamers. Imagine if every student in this school shared just one veteran's story. We could change how young people think about service and sacrifice. The principal nodded approvingly from her seat. Several teachers were visibly moved, some wiping their eyes. Even the students, typically cynical and easily bored, seemed engaged. Marcus looked directly at the camera, showing his friends from the facility. Albert, Patricia, David, Elizabeth, and everyone else I've met through this experience, you saved me. Not from legal trouble, but from becoming someone I would have hated. You taught me that wealth isn't about money, that strength isn't about physical power, and that respect must be earned through actions, not demanded through entitlement. On the screen, Albert raised a shaky hand in acknowledgement. Patricia smiled through tears. David gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. Elizabeth placed her hand over her heart. William Barrett, still in his civilian clothes, stood and spoke into the camera. Marcus, you've honored Thomas Riley's memory better than I could have hoped. This program will help countless veterans feel valued and remembered. More importantly, it will shape young people into the kind of citizens our countries need. Thank you. The auditorium erupted in applause. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not shame. His parents stood, clapping harder than anyone, pride evident in their expressions. After the presentation, students crowded around Marcus, asking questions about the program. How could they sign up? Could they bring their parents? Did he really think teenagers could make a difference? Marcus answered each question patiently. Remembering how skeptical he had been just months earlier, one student, a quiet girl named Sarah from his English class, approached him hesitantly. I saw that original video, she admitted. I thought you were the worst kind of person. But this is incredible. My grandfather served in the military. He died before I was old enough to ask him about it. Can this program help me understand what his life was like? Marcus smiled warmly. That's exactly what it's for. There are veterans at the facility who served in the same era as your grandfather. They can share stories, show you what that time was like, help you connect with his memory in a new way. She signed up immediately. The first of 67 students who volunteered that day. Over the following months, Marcus's program exceeded every expectation. Students began visiting the local veterans' home weekly, forming genuine friendships with the residents. The school newspaper started a column featuring veteran stories written by student volunteers. The history department incorporated interviews with local veterans into their curriculum. The program even expanded to include care packages, technology training to help veterans video chat with distant family, and special events bringing multiple generations together. Marcus received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs, commending his initiative and offering support to expand the program to other schools nationally. Media outlets requested interviews, wanting to share the story of a teenager who had transformed from viral villain to youth advocate for veterans, but the most meaningful moment came on the anniversary of his incident at the palace. Marcus returned to London with his parents. but this time as invited guests of the Royal Guard. William Barrett, in full ceremonial uniform, met them at the palace gates. "There's someone here who wanted to meet you," William said. Leading them to a private area away from tourists, an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, her eyes bright despite her age. Next to her was a much younger man in a military uniform, adorned with medals and insignia indicating high rank. "Marcus," William said formally, "I'd like you to meet Catherine Riley, Thomas's mother, and Colonel James Riley, Thomas's younger brother." Marcus's breath caught. He touched the pin at his neck, suddenly overwhelmed. "Mrs. Riley, Colonel Riley, I don't know what to say. I'm honored." Catherine reached out and took Marcus's hand in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "William told me what you've done with Thomas's pin, how you've honored his memory by serving others, by teaching young people about sacrifice. Thomas would have loved that. He always said the best way to honor the fallen is to live well." Colonel Riley stepped forward and saluted Marcus, a gesture that made the teenager's eyes widen in shock. "That program you started? It's being studied by military family support networks across multiple countries. You've created something that will outlive all of us, something that keeps the stories and sacrifices of veterans alive for generations. That's a greater service than many soldiers ever achieve." Catherine pulled a small box from her bag and opened it carefully. Inside was a medal, worn with age, but still gleaming. This was Thomas's bravery medal. "I want you to have it, Mrs. Riley." "I can't," Marcus protested, shaking his head. "That belongs with your family. Your family now," she said firmly. "You've carried Thomas's spirit forward. You've made his sacrifice mean something to people who never knew him. That makes you part of his legacy." Marcus accepted the medal with trembling hands, carefully placing it in the box as if it might shatter. "I promise to guard this with my life." "I know you will," Catherine replied, patting his cheek gently. "But more importantly, continue guarding his memory by continuing your work." The ceremony that followed was small, but significant. The palace had arranged for Marcus to stand alongside William during part of the changing of the guard ceremony, not as a guard himself, but as an honored guest representing youth service. Tourists took photos, but this time they captured a moment of genuine respect and connection rather than mockery. The little girl who had saluted William that day was there too, now 8 years old. She recognized Marcus and ran up to him excitedly. "Did you help the soldiers like you promised? Did you give them my bear?" Marcus knelt down to her level, just as he had before. "I gave it to a veteran named Albert. He keeps it on his bed and tells everyone it was given to him by the bravest little girl he ever met. He wanted me to tell you thank you." She beamed with pride. "When I grow up, I want to help soldiers too, just like you." "You can help them now," Marcus said gently. "You don't have to wait until you're grown. Just remember to treat everyone with respect and kindness. That's how we honor people who serve." As the day ended and Marcus prepared to return home, William walked with him to the palace gates. "You know," William said thoughtfully, "when I gave you that pin, I wasn't sure what would happen. Some people never change, no matter what opportunities they receive." "I almost didn't change," Marcus admitted. "For the first few days at the facility, I was just going through the motions, trying to complete my hours and move on. But then Albert told me about his friend who died saving his unit. He was crying while he told me after 70 years. And I realized that these weren't just stories or history lessons. They were people's lives, their hearts, their pain. That's when it became real." William nodded. "That's when service becomes meaningful, when we see the humanity in others. You've learned that lesson younger than most. Use it well." They shook hands one final time, but it felt more like a beginning than an ending. Back home, Marcus's program continued to grow. He partnered with schools across 5 states, helped establish similar programs in 3 other countries, and created an online platform where veterans could share their stories directly with young people worldwide. His social media following grew to over 2 million. His person there because they wanted to honor veterans and learn about service. He never forgot Albert, who passed away peacefully 2 years after they met. With Marcus holding his hand and recounting their chess games one last time, he never forgot Patricia, who finally found relief from her nightmares through therapy that Marcus helped arrange funding for. He never forgot David, who learned to walk again with prosthetics and became a motivational speaker. He never forgot Elizabeth, who was there when Marcus graduated high school. Sitting in the honored guest section his parents had reserved for her, the pin Thomas Riley once wore remained around Marcus's neck through high school. Through college, and eventually as he himself enlisted in the military, choosing service over the comfortable business career his father had planned for him. He wore it on his uniform, a reminder of how one man's grace had changed his entire life's trajectory. Years later, when Marcus stood guard for the first time, he understood what William had endured that day at the palace. He felt the weight of the uniform, the responsibility of the post, the honor of representing something greater than himself. And when a young tourist approached, acting rudely and disrespectfully, Marcus remained still and patient, remembering the lesson he had learned. Because sometimes the greatest act of service is showing grace to those who least deserve it. Trusting that seeds of change planted in difficult soil can still grow into something beautiful and lasting.